Hey, everyone who's joining the call. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We just want to give everybody a chance to log on. So just bear with us for a minute or two. So should we get started, or do you guys want to wait another minute? I think we're going to dive in.
Yeah,
Hi.
let's do that.
All right. Hi, everyone who's joined the call. This is, as I think you know, this is a anniversary call, 35 years of the Green Century Funds. We have on the call today Wendy Wendland and Leslie Samuel Rich. And of course, let me introduce them, and then I'll introduce myself, and then we're going to go into about an hour's worth of questions. So first off, if you're joining the call, you probably know the Green Century Funds. Leslie's the president, and under Leslie, the funds have grown to more than 1 billion in assets, which I have to say is a lot. And then Wendy is a trustee of the funds. She didn't want me to say it quite this way, so I'll say she was involved with the founding of the funds 35 years ago, which she'll tell you about. She's also president of Environment America and a senior vice president of the Public Interest Network. I'm Tim Gray. I'm a journalist who's written about sustainable investing. I came to know Leslie and Green Century in that role. And I'm so these days, I guess, a friend of the funds, and that's why I'm helping out. So to kick things off, I guess Wendy, I alluded to your role in the founding of the funds. So I mean, tell us about that. How did the Green Century Funds get started 35
Sure.
years ago?
Sure. So great to be here, celebrating 35 years. Amazing. Um, so, to take people back a little bit, in 1989, the Exxon Valdez created what was then the largest oil spill in US history. And I think it's still perhaps the worst in terms of environmental damage. And then in 1990, people around the world demonstrated their concern for the planet in Earth Day 1990. And at that point, people then began to, um, you know, do whatever they could do, recycle or, reduce their use of plastics. I mean, people began to just realize, oh my goodness, we have a problem here. So in 1991, Doug Phelps, who was then and now the leader of our nonprofit organizations, believed that the time was right to create a way for our own members, the members of our organizations and supporters to align their environmental values with their investments. So in 1991, in addition to testing out the idea that a nonprofit could own a mutual fund and people would actually invest in it, we launched Green Century with the idea that it would also provide a future revenue stream for our nonprofits. And because Green Century was and is entirely owned by these nonprofits, every dollar that Green Century earns, not 5%, not 2%, not 1%, but 100% of the dollars earned managing the funds support our nonprofit owners. So this revenue stream provides an ongoing support for groups like MassPIRG, the Massachusetts Public Interest Research Group, or CalPIRG, the California Public Interest Research Group. And this allows us to make an even bigger impact on issues like renewable energy and plastic pollution. And that's how I became involved with Green Century. So I was the executive director of WashPIRG in the late 80s, the Washington Public Interest Research Group, but we were working on campaigns to stop Hanford from becoming the nation's high-level nuclear waste dump site. We were working to establish the state Superfund program. And WashPIRG was one of the original 9 nonprofit organizations that founded Green Century. And I was invited to be a trustee. So I can't really say I was a founder. I was young, but I was there, involved, and excited about this new crazy venture that we were undertaking. And I've been a trustee of the funds ever since.
Now, you alluded to the role of the perks as owners of Green Century. I bet not everybody on the call knows how things are structured. So if you don't mind, tell them about sort of the perks ownership, how Environment America fits into this,
Sure.
and the background, a little bit
Yeah,
more of a nuanced background.
sure. Okay, so I'm president of Environment America, and Environment America has one mission to protect the natural world. We advocate for ideas and actions to guide our country into a greener, healthier path. I mean, our network of 30 state organizations. I'm here in DC, Washington, DC, in our federal office today. We work to promote clean air, clean water, clean energy, wildlife and open spaces, and a livable climate. And our members, who hopefully some of them are on the call today, put grassroots support behind our research, public education, advocacy, and litigation. Environment America grew out of the public interest research groups, or PIRG. PIRG has been an advocate for consumers for over 50 years, advancing solutions to problems that affect our health, our safety, and our well-being. 20 years ago, after careful thought and planning, we concluded that the best way to advance all of our work for both consumers and the environment was to separate our program into two distinct organizations. So PIRG continues to lead with a consumer protection lens, still tackling issues like plastics and toxic pollution. Environment America leads with a lens of protecting the natural world. And I remain involved as a senior vice president with the Public Interest Network, the umbrella under which PIRG, Environment America, and Green Century all operate. And Green Century is obviously a great partner for both PIRG and Environment America, particularly on shareholder advocacy, which I know we'll talk more about as we get into the call. So it's great to be here. And again, amazing that we're here 35 years later with this idea with over $1 billion assets under management. I mean, nobody would have believed that in the early years. Well, we did believe it, but it was hard to see it happening.
So now we are going to talk about advocacy a little bit. But before we do that, I forgot to say at the outset, so folks listening in, sorry about this. If you have questions or thoughts you want to share, just put them in the chat. We have folks are monitoring the chat. Don't use the Q&A function if you can see that. Just use the chat function. And now, so let me turn the conversation to Leslie and to advocacy. So Leslie, so advocacy is a really important thing that Green Century does that distinguishes it from many other mutual fund companies. So before I start asking you questions about that, like what does that mean, advocacy in the context of a mutual fund?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here celebrating our 35th anniversary. Like Wendy, I got started with the PIRGs too, working as a student here in Massachusetts for the Bottle Bill. And now I have the pleasure of directing Green Century. Green Century does shareholder advocacy, as you said. And so what that does is leverage the power of investors with the companies. We do it in ways to make an impact for our investors. A lot of people come to Green Century only because of our investment strategy, but because the power that they give us by being investors helps us urge companies to make changes. So that's the top thing, to make an impact, to protect the environment and people's health. We also do it because we're a mutual fund, is to help companies reduce their material risks. So whether that is they're not paying attention enough to the regulatory risks or other reputational risks that are out there, we're bringing those to light to them. And what we do is identify an issue where we think that they are weak, either just on their own or compared to their competitors, and propose a solution on what they should do. So they use too much plastic packaging, for example, and so we want them to reduce their plastic packaging.
So, okay, you mentioned reducing plastic packaging. Are there any particular engagements where you guys had a lot of success that you can talk about, particular companies where you asked them to do things and that yielded, really good benefits? And then I guess as part of that, I know you do the engagement process often in collaboration with others, and
True.
that amplifies your impact. So I was hoping you would talk about that too.
Sure. Yeah, I have a lot of favorite stories. The one on plastics, my favorite is how we started working on plastics about 8 years ago and is working with toy companies. So as probably anyone knows who's encountered someone under the age of 10 or even above, a lot of their toys are made of plastic, and a lot of those toys are packaged in ways that it takes quite a monumental effort to open that hard plastic packaging. And then they're also shipped on, you know,
Pallets.
yes, pallets that are wrapped in plastic. So there's a lot of plastic involved in these toys. And so we worked with a number of toy companies to actually reduce the amount of plastics that are in it, including Mattel. And so they made a pledge to reduce by 25% the amount of plastics in all their toys. But we also worked with some other ones like Hasbro and Disney as well. And so that's one of the ones I like because people know those names and everyone has encountered it. And plastic is a growing concern for people and their health and protecting ocean wildlife. The danger of microplastics is really very more prominent in people's consciousness now. Another one is with Costco, um, huge retailer and growing all the time. The big contribution of companies like Costco to climate change is not as much through their stores or how they source their energy, but in the supply chain that they have. So how many emissions are coming from the different products that they buy. And so a few years ago, we approached Costco and said, you're at climate risk. This is a real financial risk, as well as is making a huge impact on the environment and people's health. And so we think you should to reduce your emissions. And it's a long, convoluted story, but eventually we filed a they didn't say yes. We filed a shareholder resolution. We won a majority vote of 70%, and we went back to the negotiating table and they agreed. They agreed to make a plan to reduce their emissions, both in their stores and the electricity and fuel they were using, but more importantly, in their supply chain. And that was the first shareholder resolution on supply chain climate emissions. And so it led the way for others, us and other investors to do the same. And so that brings up the other point that you mentioned, Tim. We often do work in collaboration with other investors, whether here in the US or more and more these days also in Europe. And so usually those investment firms are bigger, but really it's to show that there are multitudes of investors that care about these issues, and it's not just Green Century. Even though we are doing it and want all these commitments to be public with a timeline, and we follow up on the implementation, that helps all investors. And we like to bring other investors with us when that makes strategic sense.
Do you, does the relationship with the PERGs help you identify environmental issues to engage on? Or is that, how does
Yes.
tell us about that. You guys can both tell us about the conversations that might lead you to pick a particular issue that Green Century engages on.
Sure. One of the issues that we were not focused on at all is right to repair. And the PERGs had a huge campaign that was growing and growing about giving people the right to fix their stuff. So whether it's their phone, their computer, or tractors even, medical devices. And so this came to our attention because the lead campaigner and advocate for it, kept saying it would be really helpful if, investors knew more about these issues and if they have concerns, brought them to these companies. And so that's how we started working on right to repair. And we had got commitments from Microsoft and Dell and other computers for places to actually give people access to the tools and instructions so that they could repair their devices. So
Yeah.
the PERGs have a lot of great research on a number of issues. Some of our issues overlap, some of them don't. But they're a great source to actually get the information on what's happening on an issue. And then sometimes we can work in tandem as well.
Wendy, you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, exactly what Leslie is saying, that both Environment America and our state organizations, which again, if people are in Colorado, they would know us as Environment Colorado or Texas as Environment Texas. So we're running at any given point in time 100 different campaigns on different issues. So we have expertise on lots of different things and are kind of paying attention to how the problems are playing out in local communities. So as Leslie said, we're sort of a great resource of both ideas and actual campaigns that are ongoing, like the Right to Repair campaign, which we've worked on in pretty much every state in the country by now. And at the federal level, we've had some success on the policy side. So a lot of our work is at the federal level or is in a state government, whether that's at the administrative side or the legislative side or litigation. And then so having the additional sort of strategic resource of being able to work with Green Century to press the same companies that sometimes our opponents in a state legislature, for instance, is helpful because you're sort of getting to them on the financial side of getting the company to understand the financial risk that they have for not dealing with this problem. And then we're pushing some legislation that they're not so sure about. And often those two things happening at the same time can help us move legislation forward. My favorite recent example is a campaign that we worked on in Georgia to protect the Okefenokee swamp. It's partly because it's just a fun thing to say. But the Okefenokee is one of the largest freshwater wetlands in the world, and it's a massive carbon sink, meaning that it's a place that we can kind of reduce carbon pollution. And it's home to over 1,000 species of plants and animals. And so our Georgia affiliate, Environment Georgia, and other groups in Georgia have really been working hard at using every lever of power they can think of in Georgia to protect the swamp from a mine. And in addition to that, Green Century filed a shareholder proposal with a company called Chemours, which Leslie knows a lot more about this than I do, but a DuPont, basically a DuPont company spinoff. And they agreed in 2022 not to buy titanium sourced from this mine that's adjacent to the Okefenokee. So that's huge. That was a huge victory for the Okefenokee. And again, just all of these in advocacy, all of these things just help build momentum for people to see a problem, see that there are solutions. I think for consumers and investors and citizens, it's sort of, particularly in this moment, having hope that there's something you can do about these problems. All of that then helps to build momentum for bigger wins in the future.
Yeah, we filed that resolution with the Felician sisters. So that's another example of an amalgamated bank 1 year. So, it's the consistent bringing people together, explaining the risks, and then really getting in the weeds and negotiating with the companies to get these agreements. The Okefenokee Wildlife Refuge is not like permanently protected yet, but there are now more barriers to it being really harmed and destroying the wildlife there and all the carbon sink and all the things that Wendy mentioned.
Yeah, and I think, the thing that's sort of unstated here is Green Century has access to a lever of power that the rest of us as, in our regular advocacy don't, because we don't own stock in those companies, but Green Century does or can buy enough stock to be able to, file a resolution.
And I would just add that one of the reasons I think our advocacy is so successful is one, the volume of that we undertake, but also that many of the advocates and myself also come from backgrounds where we know how to run campaigns essentially. And so that's where it's just different from other firms. Most of the people in other firms doing the advocacy are lawyers or people who came up as equity analysts. And so they just have a different take on how to do things. And we are used to, being very bold and strategic about what we ask and who we ask and how we take on sort of sub-industries at a time. And that helps gets the results that we want. One number that we just calculated was that We've engaged with 295 companies in the last 5 years, and we've got 92 agreements. So, like 92 companies have agreed to do things because we have worked with them and urged them to make these changes. And that, those stories and the resources we have on those stories, I think is a lot of the reason why people, find us, know we're different, and they really like understand the impact that we're making. And that's what helps differentiate us from a lot of the other firms out there.
So let's circle back a sec to the Costco engagement. And I want to return to that because I interviewed you about that, of course. And I know that when you first talked to them, they wanted to brush off Green Century. They're a big
Yes,
Fortune 500 company. They weren't interested in, although a billion sounds like a big number to me, probably a lot of the callers in the investment world, it's not, right?
right.
So how did when that happens, when a big company thinks it doesn't have to listen to these crazy little environmental investment fund, how do you respond and how do you get traction?
So that's, we always first approach the company. We write a letter, we ask for a meeting. We're hoping we can just talk with them and through that engagement move them to make a change. But if not, then we have an escalation tactic, which is to file the shareholder resolution and bring it to a vote in front of all the shareholders. And that's what we did. During the course of filing the resolution, we're briefing other big institutional investors and trying to secure their support. These resolutions are not binding, but they send a big signal. And during it, Costco also thought that they could stop us and stop other shareholders from voting for this if they promised to do some of the emissions. Like I said, there's three buckets of big carbon emissions from any company. They, unbeknownst to us, and they didn't tell us, when we're both trying to meet with the big investors that hold a lot of votes, they started saying like, well, we're going to do the easy ones, one and two. And so you don't really need to worry about our supply chain emissions. And one of the investors that we were briefing told us that. And so this is where the campaign experience helps, because then we switched our strategy and slide deck and started to, and even went to the media and started talking about this. And then when the vote came, we had no idea what would happen, but we got the 70% vote. And Casa was not excited at all, to say the least. And we gave him like a little bit of time to absorb it. And when we went to that meeting with them afterward, they have a full flank of people on the Zoom call. And they had a very different attitude. They didn't quite come around to be like, that's so great. We want to work with you. But they felt like, wow. It felt like a little like, okay, they lost this vote by a lot. And I guess they actually have to think about how addressing it. And so a few months later, we met with them again. And that is when they had worked with people within the company, maybe consultants, and had come up with a plan that would address all three buckets of these emissions. And so since then, we've had a more cordial relationship with them, but they're still Costco and really big and kind of do what they want a lot of the time. But in this instance, and in another, when we went back to them on plastic packaging, we were able to get these concrete agreements. And that's just one of the 92 that I mentioned. So
Yeah, and I think
I
it's
think it's
the, I mean,
perseverance and experience, and we keep going until we get the result. It's not good enough for us to just talk to the executives and they go, yep, yep, I listen, I hear, we're going to think about that. That's that's not.
I think the term that we would use in our, advocacy is outside game people. Like what we know how to do is to go talk to people who care about the issue outside the company. So in our case, we're able to talk to consumers and, get a story in the New York Times about the issue and inform other investors. And by doing that, you create again a momentum and a pressure on the company that is harder to ignore.
Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does. So I wanted to ask you guys just as an example, so folks can understand how you think about these issues, about an issue that maybe hasn't gotten as much attention as, say, GMOs, and that is palm oil. Palm oil
Mhm.
is in a ton of consumer products. I'm not sure even most people realize how many consumer products. And it's something I know that Green Century cares about, and I would imagine the two of you have had conversations about. So, like, how does an issue like that bubble up, and what's Green Century doing with that?
Yep, I love this issue. We've been working on it for over a decade. And honestly, it bubbled up because we were monitoring what campaign organizations do. Because of course, if there's a powerful nonprofit out there about to pressure and really do an aggressive campaign, that's a real reputational risk that the company is going to have to deal with. And so that's how we learned about palm oil. We were following a couple of different organizations, but one in particular, and we dove into it. We first worked with Starbucks to get them to pass a sustainable palm oil policy. As we learned more about the issue, we realized like that's not really the answer. It has to be a zero deforestation policy, which means that when palm oil is grown historically in Southeast Asia, they would just burn or bulldoze rainforests. And it releases carbon from the burning, it gets rid of the carbon capturing piece. It's terrible that, tens of thousands of people would go to the hospital every year because of all the smoke, and then eliminates all this habitat. And so we started working on that. We got our first real significant agreement with Kellogg's, who said, okay, we're only going to buy palm oil that is grown in a way that's not being bulldozed or burned. And so we built on that and got more and more like consumer facing companies like JM Smucker, for example, to do that. And then we started working with the traders. There's four big ones. Ones people may know is ADM. Their motto used to be supermarket to the world. And we went to them and said, there are more companies that need zero deforestation palm oil, and you should have a policy on this that you're not going to buy from all these growers that are also burning down rainforests. And we got the first, it's called a cross commodity agreement, that they agreed to do that on palm oil and soy. And soy and beef are the big drivers of deforestation in Brazil, for example. And then we've gone on to build on that. I don't know if you want me to talk about that, but we've gotten banks to agree to stop financing projects that are involved in deforestation. We recently just got an agreement with Bank of America after urging them to do that for a couple years. And prior to that, we had gotten JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and Citibank. So what that means is that if someone wants, a company wants to do more agricultural production and they come to one of those banks for a loan, then those banks won't loan them money on a project that is not guaranteed not to destroy some tropical rainforest or other degraded or important areas. Like in Brazil, it's called the Cerrado.
When do you want to jump in on that, or?
No, I mean, Green Century, that's because Environment America mostly focuses here domestically. We've actually done less on it. So I love this program because it gives us a way to, have an impact on these international problems, which we know are terrible. But from the Environment America perspective, we always think if we could just get the United States to be a leader on these issues, that's the biggest way we can, have an impact around the world.
That makes sense. Now, Leslie, actually, a question for both of you guys, especially since Wendy was involved from the beginning. So, the key pillar of Green Century is fossil-free investing. And I know, Leslie, you've talked about this a lot, and maybe you want to talk about this today. Um, you feel like there maybe are some competing products out there in the investment market that imply that they're fossil-free, but in fact aren't. But you guys, um, as much as possible, keep polluting energy companies out of your portfolios. I guess the question I had for you is, do you then sacrifice the opportunity to influence the operations of the worst polluters in our economy? And if Green Century were to maybe own some of the better players, could it actually push them into the kind of good practices you're talking about?
We did own gas companies when I started, and our main shareholder advocacy program was around those gas companies, around fracking. And what I came in and saw was that you can change pieces of the fracking operation. You can get a company to cap its well so the methane doesn't escape. You can get the other company to line its water pit so the toxic water that comes out because they inject the chemicals into the ground to do that. Most companies weren't doing all those things. Most companies weren't reporting on it, and most companies were not moving on it. And at the end of the day, you can't get a company to change its core business through shareholder advocacy. You can get it to change pieces of it, but you're never going to get Starbucks to stop selling coffee. So we are never going to get a fracking company to stop fracking. And it did not fit with us anymore. And so our balance fund had been fossil fuel free for a long time. And then we made our equity fund fossil fuel free. So it's borne out through trying to engage with gas companies for a long time. And not seeing the results of it at all. And how many times you have to knock your head against the wall and go, this is not working. And investors have been trying for over 30 years. I think the first Exxon resolution was filed that long ago. And, Exxon is essentially, right now trying to explore new basins to drill in to find oil, as they're announcing, just today. So it gave us, it didn't fit with our values about avoiding environmentally dangerous companies. Because at the beginning, fracking was like the bridge to the future, natural gas. It's gas. It's not natural. It's just gas that is polluting, and more fracking problems came out over time. So as gas became not the bridge fuel, it just became a polluting fuel. It didn't match with us. And because we don't spend all our time with these energy companies, that's why we're able to do all this other advocacy. That's just when we started working on forest protection. So I took that advocate who was working on gas, put her on working forest protection, and then we have a huge history on it that keeps growing of the work that has made an impact. So there are plenty of firms that hold energy companies, even ones that, market themselves as sustainable. And so they can keep doing it.
And
But
I think it's worth saying, I mean, early on, we did do best in class for all kinds of things. Like that was I remember that from, the list of companies. It was like, okay, well, this one's not great, but they're the best in that class. But I think one thing that's changed over the last 35 years is the economy has changed. I mean, groups, because of the environmental advocacy done by groups like PIRG and Environment America and Green Century and many of our friends and allies, the economy has changed. So there's more opportunity to support companies and be invested in companies that are not exclusively bad for the environment, like the fossil fuel industry.
yeah, energy is only 2 to 3% of the S&P now. I mean, it used to be a much bigger part of it. And so besides the fact that the moral alignment of, investing in the industry that has driven climate change more than any other. Like if you care about the environment and you want to do something with your money about it, it's like, okay, well, the first thing is you might not want to invest in those companies. So you could do that through us. But then, you get all these other pieces. So it's, to me, it's now become, yeah, a hallmark, and that has contributed partially to our growth. We avoid the whole gamut, exploration, extraction, processing, refining, and transmitting. And so, as you mentioned in your question, which now is a few minutes ago, that there are firms that put out products that, seem like they're called climate conscious or climate aware or fossil fuel reserve free. Most of those still have fossil fuels in it. You have to look under the hood. You have to look and see if the energy sector is 0%. That's what it needs to be fossil fuel free.
That makes sense. Now, so there's another energy issue that I wanted to ask the two of you about, and that's nuclear. And why do I bring up nuclear? So, as climate change is certainly one of the big environmental issues we're confronting, and as you guys know, some environmental folks view nuclear as an important non-fossil fuel energy source in the response to climate change. I know that Green Century doesn't feel that way. And so I was hoping that you guys would share kind of your thinking on nuclear and why it's not in the funds.
Sure, I can start and Leslie can chime in. I mean, there's just no reason to accept the risks or high costs of nuclear power. And climate change, while a huge issue, obviously, is not the only environmental risk that we face. So we need to be deeply concerned about radioactive waste and the pollution that comes from it. So our position is the first thing is the best energy is the energy we don't use. So energy efficiency is always going to be the best energy solution. And then after that, we have an abundance of renewable energy. We can power the country on renewable energy. So that's what we should be investing in. And on the waste, I mean, just to put a finer point on it, which is the issue that I started working on in the 1980s, stopping 77,000 tons of nuclear waste from being stored at the Hanford Reservation, which was 6 miles away, is 6 miles away from the Columbia River. And, at the time, there was no place to put the waste. That was the whole point. They were wanting to put it in Hanford, Eastern Washington. There is now 90,000 tons of this high-level nuclear waste that still does not have a home. And we're still just kind of keeping it stored, plants around the country, and every couple of years somebody proposes some solution that's not really a solution at all. So why risk the water pollution, not to mention the risk of a toxic meltdown? It's just not worth it. And we have all these other great sources to be investing in as a country.
Leslie, do you want to jump in? And as you jump in here, this might be an opportunity to talk too about sort of more broadly how Green Century, because I'm sure you review this regularly, how Green Century thinks about its investment policies.
Sure.
How often do you review them, and how do you decide what's in and what's out? Because I know
Mhm.
although fossil fuel is probably the most important issue, there are some other issues guys incorporate in the investment policies too.
No. Yeah, we're with Environment America on our approach to nuclear energy is like there's no need for it. Why take the risk? And from an investment point of view, people want to align their values with their investments, and nuclear power is not one that is usually aligned with people who care about the environment because of all the things that Wendy just went through. So, we exclude nuclear power and have for a long time. So our overall investment approach is first, let's avoid the environmentally dangerous companies. So yes, that does include fossil fuel companies now. It also includes nuclear energy, nuclear weapons. In some of our funds, we avoid factory farming. We also don't invest in companies that make GMOs. And also conventional weapons and things of that ilk. So we think about it first that way is what would people who care about the environment, what don't they just want to support? Like, let's just not do that. We recently updated our balance fund, and we have all those screens. We added a mining and pesticide screen, and a screen is when you take out the whole industry. We also added something called the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. If anyone works in this field, they're called the UN SDGs, like another acronym we need, but there it is. And we picked there were 17 of them. We picked the four like most prominent environmental ones, life above water or life on land, life below water, clean energy, and climate change. And score we look at the scores of companies across how they measure up on those issues. And so we're eliminating the companies that are misaligned with those goals. So it's one way that we have made one of our funds to date just happened the last couple of months more environmental so that we're not just looking at industries, we're also looking at direct companies, and it's not best in class. It's just, there could be a set of car companies that make it or don't make it. It's depends on how that particular company, what they do, how they do it, if there's a controversy around them. And then on some of our funds, we also have a quality screen and use other data to, make the investments smart ones.
So how often do you guys review the investment policies? Is that quarterly, annually? How often do you look at all the things you just told us about and say, yeah, we should keep doing that, or we need to do that better, or we maybe don't need to worry about that anymore?
Well, almost continually. So it's not that just we walk into a room and go, okay, now this is over. It's like we're always monitoring for new issues that are coming up, and looking at the holdings and figuring out if we should tweak the funds. So the equity fund, at first it avoided the whole train from exploration, extraction, processing, refining of fossil fuels, but it was still able, but not always necessarily involved with pipeline companies. And our rationale at the beginning was, well, a pipeline company, it could make a pipeline for water. And so public water systems are important. And so we don't want to eliminate the pipeline companies. But it turns out that when we were talking to investors, like that nuance and piece of it like didn't make sense to them. And so we went back about a year after we made the equity fund fossil fuel free and added the transmission part. So we're always looking at, we're hearing from our investors, we're following the news, we're listening to what the PIRGs are figuring out on issues, and other groups and incorporating that into how we're thinking about it. And so the balance fund was something that was in the works for a while. And we've moved forward with those changes, which is really exciting.
So we had actually an interesting question pop up in the chat, and it is related to what we've been talking about, which is, energy production and consumption. A gentleman asked, what about data centers? Data centers, as you guys know much better than I because of your work, have become controversial because of the amount of power that they suck up. I suspect that's something that you guys have both looked at and talked about. Leslie, I know there are compliance restrictions on what you can say, so if you can't talk about that, just let us know. But let me just toss it out there. Are data centers an emerging issue for Green Century?
Well, also the PIRGs have worked on data centers too. So Wendy, you want to talk about what?
Sure. I mean, for exactly what you're saying. I mean, for one, do we really need all of this additional energy? Like that's kind of our first starting point of why are we so bent on more and more and more when in fact probably the only real way out of our environmental problems is to conserve more, to use less. And so data centers just sort of go right to the heart of that. And of course, they are noisy and they use the electricity, they use a lot of water. So we have been involved in local fights all over the country, working with local activists to stop or slow or curb the data centers.
Right. And then,
Leslie, go
right.
ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
and then I believe US Perk also has done work on just AI on children's toys and how that is harmful to children and some of the ways those toys are using AI, and brought that to light.
Right. I mean, that's less on the environmental side, but it's for sure on the consumer. This is sort of where PERG comes in on the consumer side to protect consumers and to alert consumers to potential problems. So as Leslie's referring to, we've done a lot of work on toys over the years in all kinds of ways. So toy work that Green Century has done on plastics, toy safety has been a trademark issue of PERG forever. And in recent years, the toy safety issue has led us to be concerned about the use of AI in toys that are sold to children. So, I mean, I think overall, what probably the thing I am most concerned about is what are we doing? We're just producing stuff, more and more stuff. So and to produce the stuff, we burn fossil fuels. We're learning more about that as, the tankers are stuck in the Straits of Hormuz, that, we need all that oil to produce more plastic and fertilizer. And I mean, so our position is how do we get ourselves out of this, endless cycle of producing more and more without regard to the planet? And that for Earth Week, I suppose that's, the
Right, it's
important
Earth
thing.
Week. And then specifically until we can have that sort of paradigm shift in the US, that we're working on the environmental side of data centers. And so one of our advocates, Giovanna Eichner, has actually been tackling that one. And as well as there are a lot of other investors approaching it from social or environmental points of view. And I expect that our work on that is just going to keep growing over time. So it's a big issue that we think we have a role to play in and try to make these data centers until we can stop making more stuff, more environmentally careful.
So, a couple questions have come through, which I don't know if folks who are with us today can see the chat, but come at political risk from different perspectives. And I'm going to try to, pardon me, Mr. Marks and Ms. Allen, I'm going to try to merge your questions into one here. But the politics behind sustainable energy, or pardon me, well, actually, yes, behind sustainable energy and sustainable investing have changed a lot in the last year and a half. We went from a supportive administration to an administration that opposes what you guys are doing. And I'm wondering, how does that affect how the deliberations y'all are having about what the issues that are important for the PERGs and for Green Century, and Leslie, how you go about advocacy? Because I assume, I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing that the SEC may have changed its policies on what you can ask for under the new administration. So I was hoping you guys would talk about that. How did the change in politics influence what you're doing?
It's a big question, Tim.
It is a big question.
I'm sorry, but it came from pardon me, from Josh Marks and Catherine Allen. I was just trying to summarize it.
Josh Marks, he should be asking about the Okefenokee Swamp. He's one of the leaders in that effort.
Um,
Leslie, do you want to start on the SEC side?
Sure. On the shareholder advocacy side, the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, has rules around, that's the easiest way to say it, around investing and advocacy. And when you file a shareholder resolution, if you can't get the company to agree through a set of meetings, the company used to be able to challenge it. And then the SEC would basically rule on it. Like, there was 12 reasons you couldn't go forward, like if it was too ordinary business, for example, or if it was something the company, already was doing and the shareholder didn't know and they filed a resolution, you're like, we're already doing that. In November, the SEC announced that they were no longer gonna rule on those challenges and sort of threw it back to the companies to decide whether that proxy question would go on the annual ballot to shareholders. And the interesting thing that's happened is that companies, were sort of left adrift and didn't want to take some legal risks. And where they've gotten sued by like the New York State Pension Fund and other entities. And so more of them have actually been wanting to and willing to negotiate out agreements with us.
Well, Leslie, now say that I think counterintuitive. Tell us a little
Right.
bit more about that. So not what everybody would expect here.
They don't want to take the legal risk of not putting the question on the ballot. So they're more willing to work with us and come to an agreement than they were before, because before they could challenge it and count on the SEC to say, is it going to go forward to the shareholders or not? They don't want to be in that, the company doesn't want to be in the position of making that decision this year. It's really unfortunate that the SEC did this, and also, is messing with the shareholder process. So companies go, we're going to try to get rid of this issue before it goes to the ballot. And what's happened is that they're more willing to make changes, and make agreements with us. Like we have gotten more agreements this year at this time. The shareholder season is like a school year, September to June. We've gotten more agreements at this time this year than we got last year through the whole shareholder season. And so one companies are not backtracking in large numbers from their prior commitments, or not willing to make, and they're so willing to make new commitments. They just don't want to be that public about it again because of the political context in which we're operating right now. But they're still on their sustainability path and implementing, for the most part, the policies we have agreed with them on, or they've decided to undertake on their own or with other investors.
Okay. Wendy, you want to add anything?
Sure. I mean, just on the politics of this moment and how do we still get things done? I mean, we're always focused on just how do we get results, which I think you see in the Green Century work of just how do we actually move the ball forward? How do we get these companies to be better? And at the same time, that's what we do through our advocacy. We have the advantage of having been based in the States. So PIRG started in the States 50 years ago, and that's where the really our bread and butter work. I mean, I'm in Washington, D.C. today, but most of our work is based in the States. So we're able to continue our public interest advocacy in state legislatures all over the country, not unaffected by what's happening here in DC, but we still are able to make quite a lot of progress. And I'd mentioned that we've leaned into issues that that just have incredibly broad public support. We mentioned right to repair earlier, the idea that if you have a device, you should be able to fix it. That's incredibly popular all across the aisle. In every state that we've worked in, we're able to get broad bipartisan support for those reforms, whether it's wheelchairs or tractors or phones or computers. So that's a great issue. The other issue that we've had some really good success on in the last couple of years is everything related to wildlife, particularly wildlife crossings and wildlife corridors, those bridges that go over a highway and the corridors, the little culverts that go under. And again, incredibly popular across the board. Red states, blue states, purple states, doesn't really matter. People care about protecting our wildlife. I mean, it's not the full solution to protecting, the wilds of America or the world, but it's a good step forward, and it's a way again to show people that we can still work together to solve problems, to come up with solutions, get them enacted, and make a difference on these issues.
And on that particular issue, Wendy, that has been interesting because it's gotten traction in red states. And part of the reason it's gotten traction, not just because we care about animals, and I hope we all do, but because it actually protects drivers too, right?
Oh, it's incredibly expensive. It's
If you have a
yeah.
moose wander across an interstate, you're gonna be unhappy.
Yeah, no, it's an incredibly, important just consumer issue too. So yes, as you say, it's as important. And people, in those in counties like I was just talking to somebody last night who was talking about Wyoming being very concerned about this issue because it's a huge problem up near Yellowstone.
So
Yeah.
the Jen
Oh,
who asked about, ooh, Leslie, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, our investors and just other financial advisors that we talk to, like everyone wants clean air, clean water, protect wildlife, be able to fix their stuff. And so we too think about that when we pick the issues every year that we work on or continue to work on is, do they resonate with our investors across the board?
So the Jen who asked about data centers had a follow-up question, which is, has your concern about data centers, Leslie, has that led to any change in investment policy around that or any change in investments in the funds at this so far?
No, not at the current time. We're
I
watching it closely, and I think our first approach is to try to engage with those companies and get them to stop their, the more harmful practices that they're engaged in.
Okay, so let me ask a second to last question for you guys, which is, what do you see as the emerging issues, both, I think, Wendy, broadly from an environmental perspective, that folks listening in just might not be aware of, but you're starting to engage, on in your policy work. And then Leslie, for the fund, what are the emerging issues? If you can talk about them and tell us if there are compliance issues around talking about sort of what's coming. But what are you guys looking out in the next year or so as the issues that the PERGs and Green Century will be thinking about?
I'm just going to say more nature.
But tell us more. Tell us more.
We have so little time. No, I just think we're getting increasingly close to destroying every corner of the planet, and we must be more focused on nature. And I know in the investment space, there's been more interest in, how do we break that down for companies? Like, how do we get them to understand what they can actually do? And from a policy perspective, what other ways can we engage in protecting nature?
That makes sense. And Leslie, before you answer, maybe you could also say again to for everybody listening in, I'm not sure everybody is an investor yet. Maybe they're interested in investing. You might just want to tell them if they want to if they're not in the funds and would like to and are interested in the funds, how they might do that as you kind of wind up your answer.
Sure. Well, we are tackling what we will work on this summer as professors and teachers do, preparing for the next year. I do imagine that we will keep working on our core issues of clean energy, wildlife protection, forest protection, reducing plastics, and right to repair. And data centers will be in as part of that work around water and energy in particular. To invest, there's multiple ways. You can invest straight through the Green Century website. So if you do your own investing, you can go there. If you have an account at Fidelity or Schwab or even Merrill Lynch, you can, for example, you can also invest there. If you have a financial advisor, because I saw a question come in on that, you can talk to your financial advisor. Green Century funds are widely available, and you can also get more information from us and bring it to that advisor if he or she is not familiar with Green Century. We're happy to talk to and really do talk to financial advisors all the time to explain our process, the returns, what the advocacy is, and all those pieces. Here we have a set of resources, our 35th anniversary webpage with some videos on there, some resources to learn more about our shareholder advocacy. And in the middle, the picture with the grandfather and granddaughter, that's our sustainable investing guide. It walks through how you can learn more about fossil fuel free investing, what to look for, how to transition part or all of your investments into fossil fuel free funds. So you also can, you just go to our website and open an account or do any of those things. And if you have any trouble at all, call us and we will help you do it. It's not rocket science on how to get started with this. You can get started on next year's IRA if that's something you do. You can set up one. A lot of grandparents have, which is one of my favorite things, set up IRAs for their grandchildren with us as a way to instill some values and help them save for the future.
All right. Well, that's been an hour. So I want to say, hey, Wendy and Leslie, thanks for explaining all this to all of us. And to the folks who joined in, those of you who asked questions and those of you who just listened, thanks for giving us your time for the last hour. Anything you guys want to add before we end the call?
No, just thanks to everybody for taking time out, and we hope that you'll invest in Green Century.
Yeah, happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Thank you for turning in. And yeah, please explore Green Century more. And we really appreciate your time and
All right.
investments if you're an investor already.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks
Yeah.
so much.
Bye now.